Did you ever march 20 miles in full armor carrying a spear, a shield, and a sword? Probably not, but this was just another day at work for the Roman Legion. Join us as we look at what it would be like to march into battle with Rome's elite fighting force. The Roman legions were composed of foot soldiers who were called legionaries. These men were typically volunteers who had been hired by Rome for a limited amount of time. They were paid for their service and provided with food and lodging by the Roman state. However, they were not slaves, but rather free men who could leave the army at any time. To become a legionary, a man had to be a certain height and build. He had to be tall enough to reach the top of a shield wall, but not so tall that he couldn't fit inside a small tent. He also had to be strong enough to carry his equipment, which weighed about 65 pounds, and he had to be in good health, since there were no hospitals in the Roman army. Once a potential recruit had passed the physical test, he went through a series of maneuvers to see if he had the right stuff. This included a test of strength, where he had to lift a heavy weight over his head for 30 seconds, a test of endurance, where he had to walk barefoot across hot coals, and a test of courage, where he had to stare directly into the eyes of a charging bull without flinching. If a recruit passed all 3 tests, he was accepted into the army and given the status of a citizen soldier. He received training in weapons and tactics, as well as in engineering, medicine, and law. After 2 years of training, he was ready to join the front lines as a full legion. Legionaries were organized into units of 8 men called contubernia, or small detachments. Each legionary had his own tent, bed, and cooking supplies, and each contubernium had one cook whose job it was to prepare meals for the 8 men. Meals for the Roman soldiers were pretty simple. For breakfast, they might eat something like porridge or bread with cheese. For lunch, they might have some fruit or nuts. And for dinner, they would often have a stew made of meat and vegetables. In addition to their food, legionaries also received wine, which was mixed with water and drunk from a metal cup. When the army was on the move, it was common for legionaries to walk 20 to 25 miles per day. They typically started their march at first light and took breaks for meals and rest. They usually arrived at their destination in the late afternoon. When the army was camped, legionaries were responsible for setting up camp and cooking their own food. They also did drills and exercises to keep sharp. And they stood guard duty to protect the camp. Life was not easy for a Roman legionary, but it was certainly an adventure. There were times when the army was on the move for weeks or even months at a time, and there were times when they had to fight battles. But no matter what, the Roman legionaries were always ready for whatever challenges came their way. What was a typical day in the life of a Roman legionary like? To answer that question, let's take a look at one of the most famous legions in history. The Legio X Gemina was raised by Augustus in 31 BC to celebrate his victory over Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium. The legion was composed of 5,000 infantry and 120 cavalry and was stationed in Syria. One day in the summer of AD 66, the Legio was ordered to march into Judea to put down a rebellion against Roman rule. The rebellion was led by a Jewish priest named Eleazar ben Jair, who had been inspired by the teachings of a man named Judas the Hammer. Judas had been executed by the Romans 5 years earlier for preaching revolt against Rome, but his followers continued to plot. Ben-Hinnom and his men ambushed a Roman supply train and then retreated to the city of Jerusalem. The Legio X Gemina was sent to capture the city, but they were defeated by Ben-Hinnom's forces. The Romans suffered heavy casualties and the Jews controlled the city of Jerusalem. The Legio X Gemina was forced to retreat to Caesarea Maritima. There they regrouped and prepared for a new assault on Jerusalem. This time, however, the Romans were reinforced by troops from other legions. On the morning of August, the Roman legions attacked Jerusalem from 3 sides. The city's defenders were overwhelmed, and soon the Romans were in control of the city. Thousands of Jews were killed or captured. Ben-Hinnom managed to escape, but he was eventually captured and crucified. After subduing the rebellion in Jerusalem, the Legio X Gemina returned to Syria. There they remained for the next several decades until they were ordered to Pannonia to put down another revolt. The revolt in Pannonia was led by a chieftain named Bato. Bato and his men fought fiercely, but in the end they were defeated by the Legio X Gemina. After returning to Syria once again, the Legio X Gemina was ordered to Germania to fight against the Germanic tribes. Once again, the Legio distinguished itself in battle, defeating the Germanic tribes and pushing them back from the borders of the Roman Empire. The soldiers of the Legio X Gemina were some of the toughest and most experienced in the entire Roman army. They had seen combat against some of the most fierce and determined enemies of Rome. They had fought in the deserts of Judea, the forests of Germania, and the mountains of Pannonia. They had proven themselves to be loyal, courageous, and disciplined. A typical day for these soldiers began before sunrise. They would rise and perform their daily ablution, which consisted of washing themselves with cold water and scraping off any dirt or dead skin. After ablutions, they would don their armor and weapons and prepare for the day's activities. Depending on whether the Legio was in camp or on the march, legionaries were responsible for a variety of tasks. When the Legio was in camp, soldiers were responsible for building and maintaining the camp's fortifications, cooking their own food, training new recruits, and caring for their equipment. On the march, soldiers were responsible for carrying their equipment, keeping up with the column, and guarding the camp. In addition to their regular duties, soldiers were also expected to participate in military drills and exercises. Drills and exercises were designed to keep soldiers sharp and ready for combat. They also served as a form of entertainment for the soldiers. When the Legio was not engaged in drills or exercises, soldiers had some free time. Some soldiers used their free time to write letters home, while others spent time socializing with their comrades. Some soldiers even took up gambling or other forms of vice. Life in the Roman army could be dangerous. Soldiers were constantly at risk of injury or death from combat, disease, or even their fellow soldiers. However, despite the dangers, most soldiers seemed to enjoy their time in the army. They valued the camaraderie and brotherhood they shared with their comrades. They also enjoyed the opportunity to travel and see the world. Today, we remember the Roman legionaries who fought and died in the Roman army. We marvel at their bravery and honor their sacrifice. We also remember the legionaries who simply lived their lives and carried out their duties day after day. These men were the backbone of the Roman army, and it was their dedication and commitment that allowed Rome to conquer and hold an empire. So, what do you think it would be like to be a Roman legionary? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching!